Hi, what is comedy? Doesn't sound like that hard of a question, right? You say, well, something that's funny. But what's funny? That's not necessarily always easy to know. And when we step back and talk about the genre of comedy, whether in Shakespeare or today, there can be a lot of disagreements about what's funny and what's not funny. I think I'm very funny, by the way. My wife disagrees. She doesn't think I'm funny at all. She doesn't like my dad jokes, says they're corny, doesn't like my punning. Oh my God, that puts me right with Shakespeare, doesn't it? All the puns. But seriously, what is comedy? In the classic view, right? When we think of the stage, we think of drama. There are two masks, one of comedy, one of tragedy. The happy smiling face and the sad face crying. So comedy goes way, way back. But what is it? Why do we need it? And thinking about that, what makes plays comedic, or nowadays movies? It's got to be very hard to write comedy, although at least one critic argued that Shakespeare was most comfortable with comedy first. After all, most of his initial plays that were successful were the comedies. The great tragedies came much later in his career. The comedies, they soared, right? They took off right away. We're going to be reading two of those this semester, As You Like It and Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, what makes for comedy, though? We still haven't got that down. How do we be funny? How is Shakespeare funny? And what is the ultimate point? Another critic, M.H. Abrams, argues that comedy really represents the triumph of spring over winter. Now, for those of us living in San Diego, we may be a little bit, let's call it, seasonally challenged. We don't have those horrible, dark, long, wet, cold, snowy, icy, icky winters where everything kind of stops. All life seems to die or at least go underground. So that when spring comes, it's a triumph of life over death. Maybe we could think of it that way. A triumph of life over death. That sounds very big picture for comedies. But there you have it. Abrams also divided up comedies into types of comedies, and, not surprisingly, Shakespeare is found in all types. The first type of comedy is probably the one, well, it's the one we're going to be reading, the romantic comedy. Now we call it a rom-com in the movies, right, with the favorite stars of the moment, whoever they might be at any particular time. In a boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl format, right? It's very old, and it has a lot of appeal. There is also the idea of the satiric comedy, making fun of something for a point of correction. With satiric comedies, one of the works that I think of that I know that I teach on a regular basis in English 215 is Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels, there we go, by Jonathan Swift. A lot of people know it just from the kind of archetypal first book with the Gulliver showing up on the island of very small people, about 6 inches, I should point out. But there was actually a lot of political satire in this story. It appeals to children, but also was really directed to adults. So that's satire. Then there is farce. Farce is Three Stooges, right? It's just the belly laugh stuff. Nothing really grand with that. It's just intended to get some good hearty laughs. No real messages. You also may be familiar with what's called the comedy of manners, where we look at how society is and how people operate within society. It's a little bit like farce and a little bit like satire. It operates with certain stock characters, right? So like the clever servant. Are your servants clever? The stodgy, stuffy old people, often the parents who are maybe very controlling and especially controlling of money. There is sometimes a female character who again is older and let's call it sexually frustrated, right? She's kind of a takeoff on Chaucer's Wife of Bath. You see an example of her in William Congreve's play, The Way of the World. A classic character named Lady Wishfort. Yeah, that's the name, Lady Wishfort. So this is what comedy does, though. Comedy can operate on the high level and the low level. The high level would typically be wit, wordplay. It could even be like dueling battles between potential lovers, but it would all be with words, with language. On the other hand, we have low comedy, the pratfalls, the slipping on the banana peel kind of thing. Again, think Three Stooges. It doesn't get any lower than that, but a lot of people say it's really, really funny. Shakespeare, of course, operated on both levels. Famously, he had, of course, plays that appealed to a more educated group in the audience and the groundlings, the great unwashed who had very little money, but for maybe a penny could go and without having a seat, they would sit on the ground and watch the plays. He, meaning Shakespeare, wanted to entertain everybody. So you see that. You see it in other works as well, of course. Big, hearty laughs and more subtle laughs. One other feature I want to point out, it's not in all comedies, of course, but it is in the comedies that we're going to see, is the role of the forest. There's the city or town or castle. We'll call that civilization. Think of it as rationality, the mind, the reason. Characters, for one reason or another, wind up leaving that and enter into the forest. And in the forest, all the rules of rationality are gone. Things change. Things are uncertain. Sometimes women dress like men. Imagine. Pants. People change identities. Mythical creatures come to life. Things just go a little crazy. It's not what we expect. It's the world where the imagination triumphs over reason. But of course, we never stay in the forest forever. Eventually, the characters make their way back out into the sunlight, into the reason, into rationality, back into civilization. But maybe changed perhaps for the better. Another critic has once commented that in comedy, people are worse than they really are in real life. In tragedy, they're better than they are in real life. I'm not sure I totally agree with that concept of worse. I know what he means. It means they're fooled more easily and make choices that would not really be a rational choice to make. But there is something, going back to Abram's initial comment about spring triumphing over the winter. Did you notice, I'm sure you do, that in the traditional comedy, Comedy ends with a celebration, a wedding, or perhaps just the promise of a wedding, but a festival, a feast, dancing and song and merriment, good times. It's like chaos has been brought to order, and everybody's going to be happy in the end. I hope you enjoy the 3 plays, or 2 plays, excuse me, As You Like It, and A Midsummer Night's Dream.